Hi there, folks. Welcome to Storytime. I'm Dr. Jennifer Bird. I'm a biblical scholar, and I care very much about what people do with what they find in the Bible. And I am delighted to be here with you all today. I've been a little hit and miss in the last few weeks, so other parts of my life are kind of taking over my Thursday afternoon. So anyway, we're back today, and I'm excited to introduce our guest. But before we do, I want to just give you a quick heads up on a couple things. I am very excited that I am now able to share with you all that, let me see, here we go. It takes a second to come up. Yeah. So my website, I've updated a couple things. So one of them is, if you're interested in the Wild Olive podcast, which is a podcast I've been doing with a literature professor named Jean Patrol, and we have it professionally produced, so it's it's a little bit nicer quality, and it's been super fun. We're wrapping up our third season. Actually, we've recorded them all, and there are a few more episodes yet to release. But if you like the kind of content that I bring here, this is another level, kind of another similar kind of in a conversation. She's a literature professor of the Bible. I'm a biblical scholar, and we have really good time talking about ways that the Bible shows up in our current culture, right? So talking about literature, culture, and the Bible is what the Wild Olive podcast is all about. It's moving slowly today. So I also wanted to let you know that I have 2 videos now available. So I'm doing kind of a making sense of series of videos that this first one that I did release a couple weeks ago is called Making Sense of Paul, and there are 2 different parts to that. So I'm hoping to get the second video of that out this week. Probably next week, now that I think about it. So there are 2 on making sense of Paul. And then I recorded last week and edited a video called The Historical Background, or the kind of an overview of the narrative of the Christian Bible. So kind of what is the narrative arc, if you will, of if you start with Genesis and kind of work through what are the things that are talked about, what are the big events, honoring the Hebrew Bible as the Hebrew Bible instead of as a predictor of the Newer Testament. But also, what is the narrative? What's going on here? So I think and I always do that at the beginning of intro courses when I'm teaching in person. So I thought I would make that content available to others who might be interested in that. So very excited about that. And pleased to say that, yes, the audio version of Marriage in the Bible has been selling. I'm very pleased with that. Thank you for those of you who have supported me there. And I hope you'll continue to tell your friends about the work that I'm producing, whether it's the books, Permission Granted and Marriage in the Bible, or these conversations and other videos that I've produced. I very much appreciate you all supporting me and also sharing with other people the work that I'm doing and the work that others that are biblical scholars in this space are doing. So on that note, I am so pleased to introduce to you all. I think many of you already know Dr. Walsh, Robyn Faith Walsh. But in case you don't, let me offer a few pieces of her impressive repertoire here. So she is currently, I forgot to double check, but an associate professor at the University of Miami in Miami. I had a friend who went to the one in Ohio. It's a very interesting name for a school in Ohio. She's associate professor at University of Miami. She has a Bachelor of Arts from Wheaton College, the one in Massachusetts, not the really super conservative one in Illinois. That threw me initially. She earned a Master of Divinity from Harvard University in 2005, a Master of Arts from Brown 5 years later, and then also her PhD from Brown University in 2014 in religions of the ancient Mediterranean, with a focus on early Christianity, ancient Judaism, and Roman archaeology. That's a really fun combo, if you ask me. So she's currently teaching courses, or she currently, I think in her repertoire, has taught courses on, I call it the Newer Testament, but New Testament, Greco-Roman literature, material culture, and her research specialties. So that would be something you might want to think about asking if you have questions for Dr. Walsh. Her specialties: the letters of Paul, the history and interpretation of the Synoptic problem, theory and method, cognitive science. I'm a big fan of thinking that piece through with biblical studies, Imperial-era literature and archaeology, the influence of German Romanticism on the field of early Christian studies. And that in and of itself could be a really fun conversation. We probably won't get into that today, but I was really intrigued when I saw that. And also the philosophy of religion. So I have linked in the description all these pieces, also her Amazon page, which I'm not sure if we got those all linked in here, so I'm going to post it. And her Amazon book page is linked there. And her first monograph, The Origins of Early Christian Literature, Contextualizing the New Testament Within Greco-Roman Literary Culture, was published with Cambridge University Press in 2021 and is now available in paperback. I'm going to also put this down. And should have been showing this while I was talking about her. And before I bring her out, because then the screen gets really small. No, it does. Let me just pull up a couple things here. There is you can see the website here. Let me just paste that in since I'm not sure that got pasted in. So there are a couple different things, websites to know of hers. So there's this space called academia.edu, which many of you probably know about. But if you go to her page there, you can have access to quite a few articles that she has written. That is an impressive list right there that she's sharing. I'm just posting that into the chat. What else do I want to share with you all before we go? Before I bring her on, we're going to share her. I just think this is the most gorgeous cover. So I'm sharing The Origins of Early Christian Literature. Yeah, someone had some fun with this because I'm pretty sure that color in the background is not original, but it's very beautiful. All right, there are other things. So let me paste in her personal website also into the chat. And we'll share that real quick. I think that there's a lot of information on her personal website that you don't see in other places. So there's her personal, and I'll drop that link. And University of Miami, her personal website, academia.edu. I'm going to bring her on in. So Robyn Walsh, welcome to Storytime, and thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me. It's really exciting to finally get together with you and talk about whatever you want to talk about, but this will be great.
Okay, lovely. Well, I hope I shared all the right things there as we were chatting. Yeah, I do. Yeah, where to start? Okay, let's do this the way I said that I'm going to do it.
Okay.
Like, I kind of want to jump in and have
Here
a conversation.
For the long haul. We'll get to everything. So
right.
However you want to start.
Okay. Well, the way I normally start, especially since you're familiar you're comfortable doing, these kinds of conversations. I do like to start off by asking scholars. Okay, so many people here are familiar with some of your work already. And so I'd love to just know a little bit of your story. What kinds of things in your upbringing, your teenage years, your undergraduate, somewhere, wherever it was for you, when you started having these things that started to be a part of the direction that you're now taking, right? So what parts of your life help inform who you are and why you do this kind of work?
Well, this is always so hard because people narrativize themselves, in certain ways. So I'm always kind of conscious of the fact that we do that. So I'll give you some version that I think accommodates a trajectory that got me to this career anyway.
Yes. Okay.
And so we'll see how deluded I am.
But it's true. We do narrativize, right, to make sense of our lives, right? To make sense of how I got
so there's
here.
probably stuff who I might forget, or people who know me who are like, that's what she remembers. But at least what I tell myself is I was always that kid who got obsessed with something.
Okay.
Like one topic, and then I had to know everything about it. So the first one I remember is Niagara Falls. You remember, or I don't know if you remember, but there was this tendency, like in the 19th century and early 20th century, people would put themselves in barrels and go over the falls.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
I became obsessed with this. My parents took me to Niagara Falls. I was like, I used to remember the names of all the people.
Oh, seriously?
Yeah. Like I got really into that topic.
Yeah. And was it a pull, like, why would they do this?
Yeah,
like,
to understand what spectacle of it, you know, like whatever my child brain, it was just kind of fascinated by this human activity, like why that practice made any sense.
Right.
Then Robert Ballard found the Titanic. So then it was the Titanic for a while, because part of that for me, that was way before the movie.
Yeah. Right.
This was like the 80s, you know, like I think he found it like 85. And so that one for me was the technology, but also figuring out why people were so obsessed with that particular event at that time around World War I, you know, so I always kind of had, so you get the idea, like there's kind of things that I'd always find interesting. The Beatles for a long time. Yeah. So I always would get a little, you know, little focused on one time. So I remember finding an old diary I kept in 7th grade, and in it I had written, like, I think I'm going to be a professor. Like I should frame this page. Yeah. Because I was like, I have to know everything about this thing. Or I'm not happy. And I was already very clearly nerdy, you know, like with my books, and I liked to write. But my parents are in the medical field. So the expectation, unspoken expectation, was medical doctor. And I worked at hospitals, like, you know, my dad got me a job early at his hospital, and that, you know, that kind of thing. But the science and math just wasn't.
That wasn't you.
No, I might have been able to make it as a physician, but I would have been a lousy one, I think. Or I would have been a really creative mind, but not a good technical, you know, practitioner. So they used to tell me things like, you know, Michael Crichton is a doctor and he wrote Jurassic. You know, like they would try to, like, you know, but they were very good about it. Like they didn't.
That's awesome. I didn't know that about Michael Crichton.
Yeah, I think that's right. But so
somebody like that.
They didn't pressure me, but, you know, they kind of, they wanted me to, you know, not starve, I guess.
Right. Yes.
So I think I went to college with the idea, like, well, I guess I'm going into pre-med. Like, so I took Greek for that reason. Because I thought, well, maybe I didn't want to speak another language. I was always terrible at school. With the, like, you get your Spanish name and pretend to go to the library, you know, like you'd have to do I always hated that stuff. And the classics professor said, well, you don't have to speak Greek. I'm like, well, sold.
Sign me.
Sign me up. Yeah, because that sounds great. You know, maybe, you know, side note, like I'll get a little boost on, you know, etymology.
Totally. Yep.
Yeah. So that was really where that came from. I did go to Catholic school growing up. Including a school where there were only like 12 kids, run by the Sisters of the Holy Union. So it was like very like a convent, you know.
Very intense.
But I was terrible at religion, just awful. Really,
because I
didn't get it.
Connect. Yeah.
No, just didn't. I had feminist objections even back then. To like, well, because, you know, there was sort of this, you could be a nun, but that's the ceiling. You'll never be pope for arbitrary reasons. And, you know, there weren't great models in the sense of, like, you can be a virgin. Or, you know, like it wasn't.
Or a miraculous mother. You can be a virgin or.
Well, I mean, like, okay, so this is way too confessional. But I remember I used to think, like, I'm a really good kid. Am I going to get, like, pregnant with like a divine baby? Like, what is this? I was just very confused.
How does this work? Yeah,
because I'm like, should I not be this good? Because, like, I don't want to get on the radar for, like, divine conception. So I just found it all, like, a little overwhelming, and I think my response was to check out. So if you see my textbooks from, like, the ones that I can find, like, in the basement, there's, like, you know, mustaches on everybody. It just didn't click.
That wasn't working for you. I love that you were actually concerned about being too good, and that this whole unwanted pregnancy. Yeah.
I didn't, you know, especially before I understood how that worked.
Totally. Yeah.
I had this book about bunny rabbits who saw each other across a field, and then there were baby bunnies. I was like, I don't know how this works, but I'm a little concerned. You know, like I couldn't read Luke in Greek yet. I didn't understand exactly what happened to her. Right. So I was just like, but that wasn't really a question you could ask the nuns.
Not so much.
Yeah, not so much. So I just stuck like Titanic. People going over Niagara
Barrels over. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. I focus on what I could control. And so, there was no religious education or any touchdown with that
Gotcha.
until college, and I started to take Greek.
Okay.
So that was really I had in high school just by luck, AP classes. I could have graduated early, but I didn't want to be like 14 years old in college because I thought socially that was a terrible idea.
Even you knew that was a little bit crazy.
I was like, anybody who would date me, I shouldn't be dating. Right. And then otherwise, like, I'm going to suffer if I do this too early. So they let me divorce myself from the last 2 years of like the high school curriculum, and I just studied philosophy.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So that was the other reason when I went to college. First of all, I didn't have grades. So like, no schools would look at my transcript, which I didn't think about.
Oh my gosh.
But that's why I went to Wheaton, because they were very open to that kind of education.
Okay.
They assigned me to the classics professor, who then sold me on Greek for the reasons But anyway, long story short. So that's how I got to be a classics professor. Well, not professor, classics student. And then sometime around my senior year, I had taken all the courses, in Attic. And so they said, why don't you just read Koine with the New Testament professor, this man named. So my classics professor was Nancy Evans, my Greek teacher, and Joel Relihan. So I read the Medea with him. I remember that. And then both excellent teachers. And then Jonathan Brumberg Krauss was my New Testament professor. And so we would just sit and read Koine in the afternoons as like an independent study. And the thing that jumped out at me is here I am coming from philosophy, coming from Greek, and I would hit words like ecclesia or pneuma. And I'd be like, why is there a New Testament dictionary for this? Like this, you don't need that.
Like, we've already got it covered over here.
Yeah, we've got it covered with my middle little. Like, why am I, why do I need a New Testament lexicon? Like,
oh my gosh, yes.
So it was
so great.
Yeah, it was a happy accident that I was a terrible religious studies student.
Yes,
as a child.
Truly,
I didn't have those structures,
and you didn't have the kind of the unspoken like commitment to protecting, right?
No commitment to
protect. Like this religious idea is more important than that secular one or whatever, right?
Yeah, no, I hadn't that because I was kind of bumbling when it came to that. And then strategically, I eventually realized understanding all of that later theology did not benefit me as a scholar of the first century or second century, right? To understand that later theology would end up mapping for me how to read the texts in a very particular way. And I would end up spending a lot of time trying to unwind that.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so I then started to really put up, a protective measure to make sure that like I read Augustine lightly, right? Or I read, or, like the church fathers just kind of like,
dabbling, but not.
Yeah, like be aware of what they said, but not become, I TA'd for Susan Harvey at one point. So I had to learn all of the like councils and so eventually, but it was at a stage where I wasn't programmed into thinking a particular way about a certain kind of translation or a certain interpretation. So yeah, that's when I started to realize like, oh, this is sort of endlessly interesting. There's so much to do because I could remember in graduate school people being like, well, everything to say about these texts has been done. And I'm like, oh, no. No, absolutely not.
Not in my head.
No, because I can remember like sitting on a bench and thinking to myself, well, if I want a career, I think this is it because I never get tired of it. It's that same discipline of immersing yourself in a topic because you love it. And I just found it always stimulating. So that's what happened.
That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that. Thanks for sharing. Yeah.
Oh yeah, sure. I've never told anybody about the Niagara Falls thing.
But it is, right? It's, I mean, as I started asking you and you started talking, I was like, I'm doing a modern version of an ancient biography, right? I'm trying to ask you to show us yourself, right? as you said, retrospectively, this has always been a part of me, right?
Yeah. No, I just, and it's funny that it's reinforced by things like finding that old diary, right?
Right.
Whereas I said, what? Like, I think that, but I actually, wrote it down in my, silly handwriting from what I was, but it's nice to see that, right? Like, so there was always something in me that suspected, that I didn't know what the topic would be, but something was going to emerge. And then when you think about, like, I was in Catholic school all of those years, so I kind of never left, right? I have been actually doing the same thing since second grade. But just in different ways of like age appropriate, ways of approaching it. So yeah.
I love it. So so sometimes I do ask scholars to talk about were there early things that you encountered that helped to shape your voice and perhaps helped to hone in on what you're doing? But I think you've already touched on some of that, at least. I don't know. If I were to answer the question, I would mention people like Elizabeth Schuster Fiorenza's work in terms of helping me to find my own voice,
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if there are some scholars or some other scholarship that has helped to shape you. And I ask because the people who watch my live streams or watch them later tend to be intellectually curious on a certain level, and they might be interested in, if Dr. Walsh, if this was helpful for her, then I might be interested in that too, kind of thing. So I don't know. Are there people to share?
Absolutely. So the first two scholars that I read in the field when I was very young and I thought, I want to be like this, were Froma Zeitlin and Ross Kramer.
Okay, I do know Ross, but not the first person. Yeah.
I ended up working with Ross at Brown eventually, which I actually also, Elizabeth Schuster Fiorenza was my, Fiorenza without the Boston accent, was my master thesis advisor.
Was she? Yeah, for MDiv.
Yeah. We didn't see things eye to eye.
I was just going to say, oh boy, I bet that was, I love her so much, but also I imagine that was challenging, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
She was amused by me. That's what I remember.
What do you mean she was amused by you? Can you elaborate?
Because she had a very dry sense of humor.
Okay.
Very dry sense of humor. And I kind of knew that about her. And, being youthful, I wasn't above like teasing her and like manipulating that a little bit because I thought she would think it was funny. So I remember one time I told her I wasn't a feminist. And like she had
her head explode.
Yeah, she had to like sit there and like, I don't know if I'm a feminist. And it wasn't exactly true, but there's a streak. So I just kind of tortured her a little bit. It was probably not nice. I wouldn't do that today. But I was 21.
To have the mother of our more recent scholarship on feminist, biblical scholarship.
Yep.
Just to clarify for people watching, she's
I totally
kind of
did
that's really good stuff.
Yeah, she probably doesn't remember. But anyway, so she was great as well. But the person who stood out to me, in terms of commitment and kindness.
Okay.
I worked with Francois Bovon.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people have that kind of a response to him.
Like I was a starving graduate student and he would make me fondue every Friday.
Oh, you're kidding.
Yeah, and just want to talk. So like there were a lot of personal relationships like that along the way. I mentioned Nancy Evans. She was the maid of honor at my wedding. So I was like creating that family was really important. And then also speaking of, kindness and insightfulness and brilliance, it was Stan Stowers.
Oh, really?
Yeah, right from the beginning. One of my first papers I wrote as a master's student was about Stan's book on letter writing before I ever knew him. And I wrote that for Francois. And then when I applied to PhD programs, I used it as my writing sample.
Okay.
So again, I'd never spoken to him before, knew nothing about him, but he stood out to me even when I was right out of undergrad. And then I was fortunate enough to get into Brown for my doctoral work, and he was my advisor, and he's the nicest man. And he always could tell. I mean, to this day, I trust him more than, like, if I have an idea, I call Stan.
Do you?
You know? Yeah.
Oh, that's really lovely. You have that kind of relationship. Yeah.
Yeah, he has been very special to me, and he has been able to help me. I'll put it like he can help me articulate what I'm thinking before I even know what it is exactly, if you know what I mean.
You know each other well. That's impressive.
Yeah, because I had dinner. Well, you saw me with him. When we ran
I did. Yeah.
I remember we were going to dinner, and I remember saying something to him like, thank you for your help with X, Y, and Z. And he said, I just listened to you. So he's able to reflect back to me.
Sounding board kind of thing.
Exactly. And so to this day, and very supportive. And if I get stuck, he's the one I trust with all of that. So
that's really lovely. I'm so happy. I'm happy to hear about that.
Yeah, no, I've had a good run, and then with peers, I'm very close with Canada Moss.
Yeah.
And she is tireless and supportive and lovely and brilliant. So I'm very lucky to have her in my life, and Jennifer Isle is another.
I've not met her, but I see her in the virtual space. But
Aaron Roberts, Sarah Rollins. I've been really lucky to have a lot of good friends,
good people.
Very good people. So been lucky.
Yeah.
They've really helped form my voice. Stan too. It has a writing style that is a very simple sentence that's packed, and so I tease him a lot. He lives in Key West. I don't want to talk about his life, but I tease him about being Hemingway. So I've gone down there to see him, and he took me to see Hemingway's Bloody World War I when I was pregnant. So I'll say, is that who you're emulating?
All in a day, right? Yeah.
For Mother's Day, he'll send me a theory book he likes right now.
Of course, I love it. Yeah.
Yeah, Beyond Infinitude. Yeah, that nails it for Mother's Day.
Right.
You know me better than
that's really
so. He's those are the people I would say.
I love that for you. Honestly, that just makes me really happy to know about that.
Thank you. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier, you also mentioned Ross Kramer. There were two women, Ross Kramer. Was there something about any of her work in particular that was important for you, or was it, did you know her, Ross Kramer?
I mean, I didn't know her till I went to.
Right. Okay.
She had that source book on women in religion.
Yes.
I think that was what I initially read. And then it was, again, something about the writing style. So it's been important to me to be able to write in a way that is accessible and not too jargony. And that comes from people like Ross, like Stan. David Constan was a good friend and mentor of mine. He was the same way. I also really love the work of Suzanne Marchand, who's a historian.
I don't know.
He's also incredibly lovely. Yeah, this is his book. So it was something about, being an undergrad and being able to understand and conceptualize what they were talking about, but also realizing that they were communicating kind of on two registers. One to the newbie, but also you could tell there was a lot of data here to unpack if you also were in the field. So having somebody being able to do that, I thought was a great model. And when I wrote my own book, I made sure I actually would read New York Times book reviews to get a sense and reread their work to get a sense of tenor, how to write.
Right.
Yeah. So I kind of trained myself that way when I was writing my own book. And then I married a poet. So, yeah, my husband is a poet and an essayist, and so he also was able to he would read something I wrote and be like, I don't know what this says. What? He's a professor as well, but in creative writing, English, and so he kind of keeps me honest with the jargon. So that combination of friends and influencers.
Love it.
Yeah.
Love it. Yeah. Okay. Well, so I'm wondering then, since right, a little bit of your story, what you like to do, or how you came into doing this kind of work, right? I'm personally also pausing a little bit to process because I do watch a couple. I don't spend a lot of time watching my colleagues like public scholarship, because I usually am already aware of what you all are saying and doing. But every now and then I'll watch one that Derek puts out from one of your interviews on Myth Vision. Yeah. And I'm like, I want to talk to her about that. But I didn't, I wasn't making a note of things as so I, maybe the easiest way is to get into kind of the conversation that you are having with your first. Is your the book you published in 2021, was that remaking your dissertation, or was that something new?
Substantially.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I rewrote the whole thing. I
Okay.
mean, there's a story behind that too, but it's okay.
Well, do you want to share the story?
I was lucky to get this job at Miami before I was done. So it was
gotcha. Okay.
Like, you have to get the dissertation done in the next 6 weeks. And it was like, so but when I wrote the book.
That's what you mean. It was significantly rewritten.
Yeah, because, so the dirty secret in academia is that you tend to go out on the job market a little bit early just to test the waters.
Totally. Yeah.
Interviewing. And don't expect to hit
6 weeks from now, you're actually taking a job. No.
Yeah, and you lie. The dissertation's done.
It'll be done by then.
Yeah.
Next year.
So apparently the chair of the department called Stan. He said, she'll get it done. Like they just, so I got David Constant let me live in his basement. And they just every day I'd walk the dog, work on the,
that's it.
Yeah.
For the next 6 weeks or whatever.
But so when I wrote the book, I had to really start from
tease it. Okay. Gotcha. Okay. So I think I'd like to, I guess the question I would pose is, the subtitle here, right? Contextualizing the New Testament within Greco-Roman literary culture. Can you talk to us a little bit about what you're doing in this book? Why should we care? If people are here because they've come from contexts where they were reading the Bible and they're trying to think differently about things, something like that. How does it help us, right, to understand Greco-Roman literary culture that then helps us understand the Newer Testament? I call it newer. I can't help myself.
Well, the essential thing about that book was trying to figure out, how do we locate these authors? Because we tend to see them in a lens where they're fairly isolated from the culture around them. This kind of goes back to what I was saying before about learning Greek and reading the New Testament for the first time and being told I need a different dictionary, and you ask why. I mean, these people didn't make up words. These words already existed and had meanings, right?
Right.
So I was very concerned and thinking about the technical aspects of what some people might call book culture, but I'm also thinking about authorship here, because there was a bit of a tendency in New Testament to attribute everything that was going on in the Gospels to either just purely religion and that realm, and an idea that Christianity was separate from the culture around it, or attribute it to kind of culture. In other words, it was the community's oral tradition that they were recording, not, a technical literary treatise of some kind. But there's nowhere else in literature, ancient literature, where you'll say a community wrote a text. It's always
right.
Now, that's not to say there can't be oral tradition. It's not to say there aren't, what we might call communities around somebody like a gospel author, even, a religious community. But when you think about how writers have always written, and there's some cog sci behind what I'm talking about here too.
Cognitive science.
Yeah, there's the most formative community or network, social network for writers or other writers. And it's because there's certain, what we might call genre or forms that are expected. And nobody writes in a vacuum, in the sense of you want people to read what you've written, but you have to kind of fall in line with some of the expectations of the day in terms of roping somebody in, hitting marks, to, communicate some of even that like unarticulated stuff, right? And so, as many people well before me have noted, there are many aspects of the Gospels that reflect stories like Plutarch's Life of Alexander, or the Greek novels, or the philosophical terminology, or even just evidence that the Gospel writers had access to the letters of Paul. I mean, the literary fabric is evident, and scholars like Dennis MacDonald have pointed out, there's a lot of Homer there. And so when you think about anybody in antiquity who could read or write, which was a fairly rarefied group, even if your Greek wasn't awesome, I mean, you had to like not be a fisherman. You had to like not be a subsistence farmer, because otherwise you had no time to learn to read and write, which, I have a 6-year-old. I can see how hard it is, right? Like,
right. He's well supported.
I work in my own lab. But like we all know, like, the commitment it takes to achieve literacy or high literacy. And I would certainly say someone like Luke is, aspiring to a higher kind of literacy. For sure. He knows the Greek novel. Sure. So these guys are all writing in Greek, which means they went to school and they read Plato and they read Homer. And that's what they went to school on. Sometimes I'll say to my students, like, how many of you still have to read Shakespeare in high school?
Right.
Right. And that doesn't necessarily mean, like, I can tell that you have read Shakespeare in all of your papers, but occasionally something will slip in there, say, or Shakespeare made up all kinds of words, right? Like, sometimes you're not even aware of it. And like, so that kind of education comes through. And again, with such a narrow field of people who can read and write, they're talking to each other. And so one thing I tried to do in that book was reinforce that if we really want to understand who these people were, we have to think about those authorship networks and that technical aspect of writing. What did it look like? Because, of course, we want to know more about early Christianity than we have evidence for. It's just a reality and a difficult one, right? But we're sort of deluding ourselves, I think, in a certain way. And I don't mean that pejoratively. I just kind of mean like as a descriptive of the situation. We're so, hungry for more information. We don't want to try to extrapolate from these texts like imaginary communities and like the mirror reading of like, well, if Matthew changes this about Mark, does that mean the Matthean community thinks X, Y, and Z? And the reason I discourage that is because there's no answer, because there are 10,000 books on the Matthean community and they all say a different thing.
They do, right?
Like, it's like coming up with anything, right?
Right. We're not,
it's actually pulling us further away from the goal.
Exactly.
Which is to understand who these authors were, because, this is where the cog side kind of comes in. Let's take oral tradition, right?
Okay.
I want to think that there's oral tradition in the Gospels. There has to be something.
Right.
Now, how do I get at it?
Exactly.
I don't know.
Right.
Because some people will like use some evidence from cog sci or other areas to try to talk about like how you can detect an oral poem. And there's a lot of great work in those areas. The problem is the Gospels are not a poem, right? Like it's, and I understand there are strategies for like memorization, but this idea that the ancients had a different cognitive structure than we do because it's an oral culture. And, like that's something people can throw out, but you have to demonstrate it in your scholarship. And I think that sometimes is lacking. But maybe one strategy is to start with, to the Greco-Roman literary context, what can I tell here has been used 10,000 gajillion times by other Greek and Roman authors, as a motif or a saying or an idea or a theme that is there in a positive way to communicate the gravity of who Jesus was, or his divine status, or something that to an ancient author is what you do to communicate X, Y, and Z. And so then you can understand these are literary elements. And then maybe what's left over, right? Then you can start talking about oral tradition or other things. And that's for other scholars to do. But I was just very interested in, what can I detect as part of that intellectual culture? And also really challenge the idea that I think does come up with Augustine and people later about like what historicity means. I think the ancients have a lot more tolerance for ambiguities.
I was just going to say, yeah, for making things up or the
or
lack
like
of
giving
certainty.
you, like I mentioned Plutarch, Plutarch says flat out, I want to give you an impression of the person. And if you get the correct impression, that's good enough, right? So I'm not going to tell you all of the details of the major battles. I'm not going to give you all this minutia. Because I want you to get a sense of what it was like to smell the guy. I mean, like he actually describes how he smells, like he wants you to get a feeling of what was it like to be around this person and what did you gain from that experience? Not was Quirinius governor of Syria? And those things are there as details that all historians do that, like they want to give it a patina. Being historical, but they don't have Wikipedia. So it's okay if their dates are kind of off. They were ballpark and that was good.
Good enough. Yeah.
Good enough.
We have the general sense of when this took place.
Yeah. Exactly. And so those are the things that are interesting to me, because then you're bringing the ancient literature, that interface with our expectations and our desires. So that space is really compelling to me, because there's a lot for us to untangle there. So that's what I was trying to do with the book.
Yeah. I love even just at the beginning of what you were starting to explain, I had this really helpful because I hadn't extended it this far, I suppose, right? Thinking about, oh my goodness, there's so many things about biblical texts and the faith communities that do read them, that so many pieces that people have been taught to think of, this is special, right? Jesus is special. This is the only person, I thought this until I got to graduate school, he's the only person who's talked about as virginal birth and all these things, special. Like, nope, that's not special. That's not special. Nope, not special. Oh, and even, right. The going about of the writing and the extent to which these passages, these writings, these texts would have been special, right? In the way that they're collected, or the thing, you just expanded that for me in a way I hadn't just bothered to think about, right? That there's nothing special here, right?
Or let's figure out what is, right?
Okay.
Because if you're a protectionist about like there are no other virgin births, and you're like, here are 6 more,
right?
Or like there's no empty tomb. I've got a list of 47.
Right.
It's just kind of like, sorry.
These are not sorry. Sorry, not sorry.
These are motifs. Sorry. Right. Like, it's an important motif. Here's what it meant.
And here's why it's important. Yeah.
And here's why they did it.
Yeah.
But those things to me are like, I want people who want those faith-based answers to also have stake in the game. Like I want to be able, I don't want to ignore them.
Right.
And so that's why I just want to say, like, that's why we don't need the 75th book on the Methane community. I'm sorry, but like, let's try to like do this historically, if those are the questions you want answered. Or let's figure out like why were people attracted to the Gospels then, right? If it wasn't because of its radical and unique individuality and idiosyncratic, right? Then what was it at that moment, at that time, about these texts that, quite obviously, something about it clicked.
Right.
And so that's what I'm more interested in.
Yeah. Okay. I like that. That's, I'm trying to figure out a way to get you to talk about it a little bit more, because can I also, I made a quick comment before I brought you on about the cover. I just want to ask you about it. It's a beautiful cover, but did you get to help design it?
Yeah. So I had some contemporary artwork I wanted, but we couldn't get, I didn't, this being my first book, I didn't realize you don't get to pick your title. You don't get to pick your artwork.
No.
Unless it's free.
Right. Exactly.
I have this beautiful piece of art I'd like us to get. No.
How many thousands are you going to pay us? Pay for that? Yeah.
And so, the publishers will usually give you like, we have a subscription to this database of
Yes.
images, go fish.
Yes,
right?
exactly. Yep.
And so that is from, I believe, the Rosario manuscript, which is housed in Italy.
Okay.
I think it's somewhere in like, I can't remember.
Okay.
That's
okay.
Like around Tuscany or something.
Okay.
But it's a beautiful manuscript.
It is. And is it originally this color?
It is.
Oh, see, that's new to me.
I mean, it might be a little more orange. Like I've seen other, it's very obviously vivid. But there are multiple pages. This one is the cleansing of the temple.
Okay.
And so because I focus primarily on the Synoptic gospel writers in the book, I liked this for a few reasons. One, so I did select it. One is because at the time, the pandemic, they're socially distancing. Give it a high five. But also, and I thought that was kind of cute. Like, obviously, they're not giving a high five.
Right.
Yeah. But then the other thing is that there's a big chapter in that book about the influence of German Romanticism on the field of New Testament studies and the not so subtle evocation of those colors. That was definitely in the back of my mind too, for people who read the book and could make that association as well. So that's why I selected it.
It's a lovely cover. Yeah,
it turned out, and then when I actually got it, the joke is that the cover is kind of soft.
Is it?
The hardcover version is kind of soft, and it kind of feels like human skin. So I had all kinds of friends sending me creepy videos of them petting my book. But it's kind of nice.
Yeah. Like a smooth texture, kind of velvety kind of
a little like velvety.
Okay. Nice.
But anyway, so that is an actual manuscript.
Okay.
It's a nice cover.
It is a nice cover. Okay. So, let me see. Do we have? Oh, I have ignored the chat on the side because I've been trying to just.
I had private chat open. Here we go.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I'm just going to share that Jennifer Silvas, thank you for the super chat and looking forward to this. And so I hope that this has been fun for you, Jennifer. Heathen Granny is in the house. Love your views on Christian studies. So thank you for your super chat as well.
Someone picked up on the faith and grace thing.
Oh, did they? Yes, we were chatting beforehand about our three names and yes, the parallel there in our middle names. And
there are questions about my office decor.
Well, it is
which part?
Right.
I've got some stuff hidden here.
Oh, right, out of sight. People having a good time chatting, which always makes me happy. People do that. So, does anyone have any questions for Dr. Walsh? I didn't see any as I kind of skimmed through.
I see one about genre.
Do you?
Yeah, and somebody, Hollyhock, asked about genre and might have detected that I sort of tripped up there for a second, because genre is really kind of a modern concept. In some ways, this idea that we slot ourselves into particular genres, and of course that's reinforced like every time you go to a bookstore or any classes you might take and write.
Right.
So in antiquity, we more or less can kind of describe kinds of literature in what we might call genres, or put them into different kinds of, columns. So people who are writing biographies, they are fairly aware that they're writing something called bioi, like biography. That's where we get the word from. Or people who are historians. It's not like those words don't exist, but it's also not exactly the case that people would think like, well, I'm a historian now and I can only do work in this kind of way. So you do see some overlap with a historian adding some biography, or a biographer adding something that's kind of novelistic to their writing, and that was perfectly permissible in antiquity. So let me look at so the ways the Greeks and Romans they didn't quite talk about genre like we must conform, but there was definitely an idea in terms of literary strategy or structure. I mean, certainly I mentioned letter writing before just as an example. I mean, writing a letter is a particular kind of genre, and there were traditional openings and content, and you could use things like, Paul certainly does diatribe as a literary strategy within a letter, right? Like that kind of stuff we do have evidence for. So that would be how the Greeks and Romans did have an understanding, but you weren't locked in a particular way.
Oh, that's sorry, just a random comment. Jennifer's comment, my daughter's name is Charis, like a grace. Yes, that is reading John in Greek years after her birth. I realized it's also that is how it's used in John's letters for sure. But Charis is just term grace typically. Yeah.
Can't show you the hidden stuff in the office.
Yeah. You're not going to give us a full tour of the office.
Well, okay. I sometimes let my students make apotropaic symbols in class.
Oh.
And the phallus is one of them. So.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah. It's probably best to just
those. I had a former MLB baseball player take my class, and he was like, "Can I make a mosaic of that?" And I was like, "So there is a phallic mosaic off."
Nice.
Guide made for me by a former.
I would want to keep that too. Yeah.
This being Miami.
Yeah. Yes. So what are you working on right now?
Well, I just published a whole bunch of stuff.
Okay.
Okay. With a few more things coming out. So I guess personal plug time. We were just talking about an article I did for the Journal of the Historical Jesus called The Mouse of the Mysteries. And so this was actually an article that I can't believe they let me publish. That's based on something I would do in the class. So they asked me to write an article about pedagogy, teaching strategies. And I always would occasionally, if I felt like the class needed a boost, I would come in one day and I would pretend it was 2,000 years in the future. And I would prepare a PowerPoint and give a lecture. Like I would just hold character. Like it is 4025 and I'm going to do a lecture. I used to do it about Kanye West.
Okay.
I don't do it that but I would recreate an entire reading of 2025 or 2024, whatever it was, based on archaeological evidence. And so, for example, I'd be like, we don't know what happened to paper money. There used to be coins. There used to be paper coins, and then all of a sudden, like it starts to drop off around like the early to 2010s.
Yeah.
So like you get the idea. I would do that kind of thing. So what I did for that article is I created an alter ego. Because they let me do a pedagogical introduction and then do a hard break so you can assign the article as if it's a real article, but it's not me. And it presumes it's 2,000 years in the future and that I'm an archaeologist who, after some kind of unclear great cataclysm, has started digging up an archaeological site from 2025 in Orlando, Florida. The location goes unnamed for legal reasons. But that we also think that there are sites in Los Angeles and Tokyo and Paris for this anthropomorphic mouse deity, for which we're also finding votives, in domestic spaces.
Yes.
And also on cars, which seem to be an apotropaic symbol. And so, my initial excavations of Orlando tell me that this was a cult site, that you went through the mysteries of the mouse. And the mouse revealing himself in human history. So that's like, kind of like Constantine with the flaming Cairo, like I have a flaming mouse at the end. So that I just did.
I love that.
That one just came out. I used AI to recreate the sites.
Oh, did you? Oh, nice.
Yeah. So there are archaeological images that I used AI to create. So I was also trying to show like, how can AI be a productive tool?
Yeah.
I have a piece that just came out on Stoicism, where I collected all of the jokes I could find about Stoics.
Okay.
Because before they became, the sort of like Roman paragon of philosophical thought, there was a space and time where there was sort of like the fits and starts of it inculcating itself among the Roman elite. So there would be jokes at Stoics' expense. So,
Okay.
you know, like everybody is a Stoic until they're like in a boat that's about to like,
Yes.
you know,
Right.
that kind of thing. So I collected all of those, and then because early Christianity tends to also, especially Paul, you know, engage Stoic ideas. I did a little comparison of, you know, it takes Stoicism a while to not be mocked and satirized by the Roman elite. Similarly, Christianity takes about the same amount of time. So there's some kind of social development here where there's that period, you know, in the 2nd century where you have like, you know, Contra Celsum, right? Like you have, or like Pliny and Trajan, for those who think those are genuine letters, like, you know, not understanding what Christianity is. So
are you saying they're not genuine letters?
Oh, some people argue they're not based on the vocab, but I still think they're genuine.
Do you? Okay, good. I was like, I don't have time to look into
Some
that.
people
And I love.
You know, some people have been questioning it. There were a few articles doing some, you know, the vocab is not the same in those letters as the rest of the corpus kind of argument.
Interesting. So can I maybe
I can't remember the name of the author right now.
I was going to ask, so do you know, is the pushback coming from potentially someone protecting the faith, or is it a secular minded scholar saying, I don't buy that this is actually, do you know what I'm getting at there?
The person who wrote it, it's in one of the footnotes in the Stoicism article, was doing I've been using a computer program to look at language. And let me tell you that I can see these particular letters are outliers among Pliny's letters.
Oh, I see.
I don't recall a particular axe to grind along
right.
of that.
Right. No, that's just a that's just.
And I haven't seen anybody else follow up with that particular thesis of like, okay, so now that we have this data, what do we do with it?
Yeah.
So, but I have been in, you know, conferences and conversations where people are like, if they're real,
okay.
You know, so I just want to make sure, like, I
appreciate
cover my bases. I know there are some people out there who think they're not. I'm not there yet.
Okay.
I still think they're real.
Okay, good. Because I really appreciate those two the letters and how helpful they are. Yeah. They're really helpful for making sense of First Peter and Revelation.
I don't want to let them go yet. So
anyway, sorry about that.
That's okay. That was that piece, and then I had another article come. I had a piece come out on Laodiceans in an edited volume by Chance Bonar and Lindenlaub. Where I compared Paul to Andy Warhol.
Nice.
So that came out earlier this year.
What were you saying about Laodicea?
I was saying that we tend to ask the wrong questions about that letter, because if you look at scholarship, so this is a letter that floated around in some canons for some period of time, and then eventually drops out because it's exceptionally short. It's supposed to be a letter that Paul writes from prison. And everybody pretty much knew it was fake because it was taking, I think, stuff from like Galatians and Philippians or something. And it was like, you know, an old timey hostage note where people would like cut stuff out of newspapers and like, put together. It kind of looks like that. And so when you read scholarship on it, people would say like, this insipid forgery, you know, like, this worthless scrap of junk. And it was mostly because they were like, this doesn't tell me anything about Paul, because it's just like pastiche. But my point was, you're asking the wrong questions. You want it to tell you something about historical Paul. That's not its point. Its point is telling you something about 2nd, 3rd, 4th century literary habit and the construction of Paul as a founding figure and filling in narrative gaps. So that's where I was just trying. So the reason Andy Warhol came up is because of the factory. Sometimes to authenticate a Warhol, you need to actually find out who in the factory signed it for him, because he just like wasn't around to sign green stamps, you know, like so this idea of somebody being the author, right? It actually only being authenticated because it's representing the author, capital A. So that was what that piece was about. I was in the Warhol phase at the time. You know,
one of your little deep dives?
Yeah. I had the Hemingway phase a couple years ago. Now I'm in the Warhol phase.
Okay. We did have another question from Outsider Test of Faith. Question: do you think Paul really traveled to Arabia, Mount Sinai, and do you think he went to Jerusalem 3 or 7 years after his conversion?
I don't know about the first part of that question. I mean, I don't remember how many years he says until he goes to, doesn't he say he goes to the Jerusalem Council in Galatians, and then it also appears in Acts. So I don't remember how many years that was. He does say at some he likes, but I feel like it was an even number. like
14
years later.
Yeah.
Or that. Like I feel like it was a different number. So if we take his own testimony, I don't tend to use Acts for much. For the historical Paul, even things like Tarsus, I'm not sure. But yeah, so I think for the second part of that question. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'm curious now if you have a quick little super chat or kind of a thanks, super thanks. Speaking of Warhol, Basquiat. Oh.
Yep, I'm writing something about Basquiat right now.
Are you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, another one of my deep dives. And just real quick, another article that just came out.
Please.
I wrote Paul and the Moon. So that's also that was the one I couldn't remember.
Paul and the Moon? Saul and the
Yeah,
Moon.
what Paul thinks the moon is.
Okay.
Because I have a whole argument about when you read like 1 Corinthians 15, or when he talks about going to the third heaven, and he understands layers to the cosmos. So I argue that that's where he thinks everybody's going to end up.
Is the third heaven or the seventh heaven?
He understands that there are layers to the cosmos, so that's why there's a third heaven. So I pick apart his Greek a little bit, and a lot of the Stoics think that souls end up going towards the moon. So it seems
that's where that kind of idea.
Yeah, he's following. And I quote David Bowie quite a bit.
Nice. I love that.
Yeah.
We're right at an hour, so I do want to respect your time, but I have one question for you that because of the previous question.
Answer the questions. It's no problem.
Do you talk? The question was posed about Paul's conversion. Is that the language that you use for Paul? What language do you use?
That's a good question. So the idea of conversion, the way that we use the word, the idea is turning, right? Like when you think about the word, and let's call it its original meaning. Like you turn from one perspective to another, but we tend to use conversion as this wholesale, like I'm going to change my whole life. And like certainly Paul does radically change his life in many ways, except he still remains a Jewish Pharisee.
Right. Yes.
I think the danger of that word is like, he sees the risen Christ and he becomes a Christian is the implication of the word conversion. When I think the turning is from a life of trying to ferret out disparate perspectives on, messianic figures or however you understand his, pursuing, whether it's Christ groups or other groups as a Pharisee, and then his later activity where he genuinely thinks that because he's seen Jesus, that he's defeated death, therefore he is the Messiah, therefore he has a particular reading of the Hebrew Bible in that case. And so I think he always remains a Jewish Pharisee, and that for him, his task is to graft a certain number of Gentiles back into the fold. And so the covenant between the Jewish people and God remains the Jewish covenant, but he's establishing a new covenant for the Gentiles. That's not a new religion. That is still I guess call it a version of Judaism, or it's still a fully Jewish point of view. It's just one in which he's taking a particular perspective and reading of who the Messiah is. But that Messiah was always predicted, right? So for me, conversion, it's more about our use of the word that I think it implies a lot that I want to make sure that we're careful about.
I agree with you. Yeah. I like to talk about his epiphany or his, think this idea, but I agree with you on the conversion. He's a Jewish man to his dying day, right?
He is, yeah.
Yeah. Dr. Walsh, Dr. Robyn Faith Walsh, thank you for joining us today for Storytime. It has been my pleasure.
It's been great. Thank you. I hope I didn't overshare.
No, I know academics tend to not be comfortable with that, but it was great. No oversharing. Nope.
No, thank you so
Yep.
much. And I hope to come back on.
Yeah. Well, let's do that then.
Okay,
Okay.
that'd be great.
All right. That is wrapping it up for story time for today. I am so grateful for all the ways that you all who are able to be here, want to be here, and able to be here live with us, chatting in the live chats and just enjoying wherever you are. People who are watching it later, thank you so much for joining us and for supporting the work I'm doing. And I appreciate all the ways that you all do that, whether it's here showing up or commenting or sharing. Subscribing to my channel or becoming a member. I have a range of ways and levels that you can be a member of my YouTube channel. I appreciate that. Or the books that I've worked on and I'm promoting. I appreciate all of the ways that you all help me get my work out there to more people who are interested in it in the same way that you all are. So next week it'll be me again, and then we'll have Dr. Stavrokopoulou in 2 weeks. So that will be fun. And I am going to go out with this. So I'll see you all next week.